Alright, with our database successfully set up in MS SQL Server Management Studio, we need to go back to our FTalk Studio project. And you should find in your project tree a folder named Data Log. Okay, we're going to go ahead and expand that, and then you'll see Data Log Models. So we have to create a new Data Log model to be able to log data from our project into that new database that we configured. So we want to right click and select New. And under Storage Format in the Setup tab, the first thing we need to click on is ODBC Database. Okay, and before I go into setting up the ODBC data source, you'll notice that there's 3 tables listed here. These are the 3 tables that once we're finished will be set up in your SCADA database that you configured or created in Microsoft SQL Server. Okay, so one thing at a time. What I want you to do is click on the ellipses beside the data source. Click on the System Data Source tab at the top. Now I have several data sources listed here, but I want to create a new one so that you can go through the exact same process. So part of setting up the system data source is going to be configuring a driver in order to connect to the database that we've just configured. So click on New. We want to say we want to create a system data source here. And you notice there are several different drivers now that we could select from for our data source. We're going to select a SQL Server driver. Click on Finish. Okay, as it says, what name do you want to use to refer to the data source? And this is the ODBC data source. Okay, so the name that we'll come up with in this instance is going to be, let's call it SCAD data and your initials. Okay, as far as the description, for the description in this instance, I'm going to call this mashing area data. Okay, so you provide it with a specific name that is tailored to the area that you're monitoring, and which SQL Server do you want to connect to. So click on the down arrow, and you should see that FTalk view tag DB that we originally pointed to in SQL Server. Click on Next with that configuration made. And I have created this once before, but that's fine. I'm simply going to overwrite it. Yours I expect will be new. So how should SQL Server authenticate the login? So as long as Windows is going to be used, the Windows login and password is used for authentication, we're going to be happy with that. So we can simply click Next. We do want to change the default database that we're going to log to the new one that we created. So scroll down to the SCAD underscore in your initials, click on Next, and then Finish. So here you'll notice we get a summary of the new ODBC data source that's going to be created. You notice it has a data source name, of course according to what we typed in, a description of the data source itself, and the database that this information is going to be stored in. Last thing I'll do is click on Test Data Source. You notice it tested successfully, which we like to see. And we'll go ahead and click OK here. So now we need to select from the list the new data source that we created. So with that highlighted, I'll say OK. And you'll notice it shows up in the data source text window, or text box. Okay, so the 3 tables that are created. Right now, if I simply said create tables, by default it would create a tag table, which includes the names of the tags themselves that we want to log in our database. The float table are the actual values of the tags, and that gets stored in the database. And then the string table is any data that is outside of a number. Any string data would be stored in the string table of the database. So I'm going to change the float table title and simply call it value. Okay, and then we're going to say create tables. You notice it says tables were successfully created. Click OK. And now we're going to verify that these tables were set up properly in our database. So go back to your SQL Server Management Studio. I want you to right click on the tables folder underneath the created database that you built. Simply click on refresh, and then let's drill in here. You notice now we have these 3 tables set up, which means we're going to store that specific data in an organized format, which would be in columns and rows according to the descriptions that we discussed in the FTalk View Studio screen. Alright, good stuff. So our database is set up properly. We now have a location to store our data. We're going to minimize Management Studio, and the next thing we need to do is look at, first of all, log triggers at the top. And in log triggers, we are looking at, we periodically want to log data, is the way it's selected right now. By default, our interval is 10 seconds, which means we're going to log data every 10 seconds, and we're okay with that. But of course, now you know where to go if we wanted to log data on a more frequent or infrequent interval. Click on the tags and model. So we've set up a database with some tables in it so that we're organized and we know where we want to put the data, but we haven't told the data model exactly which tags we want to monitor. What do we want to archive? What information? So under tags to add, we're going to click on the ellipses. Okay, and you're going to navigate to your, in this case I've navigated through my secondary control logic shortcut. Alright, and I'm going to highlight all 4 process variables, which means it's going to log the data for all 4 waveforms coming out of that controller. With those highlighted, I'll say add tags to list. We'll click on OK, and make sure you click on the add button to add these tags into the data model, the data log model. There we are, and say OK. Now we have to give it a name, so this is going to be the name of the actual data log model that appears in the project tree in the left-hand pane. So I'll say mashing area data log. We'll click OK. Alright, you notice it shows up underneath here. Okay, and at this point we've now created a data log on the inside of our FTalk Studio application, and we now have a place using Microsoft's SQL Server Management Studio to store that information. Of course, that specifically is the database. Alright, a couple more steps. So the next thing we need to do is command the data log to start logging data. In other words, activate the model itself. So how do we do that? Well, on our Area 2 screen, what I want you to do is go up and select a button. It's the same button that we would have used for the command line action. We wanted to navigate from one screen to the next. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and locate a button here on the screen. I'll go default for the style. Under action, it's going to be run command. Now press action, click on the ellipses, and we need to go into, previously you would have been in the graphics folder. We'll minimize that. You need to go into the data log folder and click on data log on. Click next. Okay, the area can be set to default. The file itself, what is it that we want to activate? We want to activate the mashing area data log. There we go. Okay, click on finish, and you notice the press action now says data log on, which means begin the mashing area data log. Go on to the up appearance tab at the top, and what I'm going to say here is start data log. We'll say OK, and as you might have guessed, I'm going to copy this because we need a way of stopping the data log as well. So we have the start data log, stop data log, but I need to go in and configure the stop now. So under action, we could either change the on to off, or we could simply go in and select it. So we'll go data log off, configure it, of course, which data log. We want to turn the mashing area data log off. So we'll say finish. Oh, and we also need to make sure, because we copied this over, make sure you delete out the data log on text from the press action text box. We'll delete that out, and now data log off, so when we hit the stop button, the mashing area data logging will stop. Under up appearance, we'll simply change the start text to stop. Click OK. We'll save up our screen. And now it's time to go ahead and test this. So in order to test this, what we're going to do is go up and put the screen into play mode. And what I want you to do is to watch the window down on the bottom of the screen itself. Okay, so if I click on Start Data Log, you notice there's a few different lines that come up. First of all, data log on command was executed, the model itself started, and now we're logging data. So we're physically logging process variables 1 to 4 into our database and monitoring the constant changing variable with respect to time. Now let's go have a look in our database to see that specific data as it's being logged every 10 seconds. So go into SQL Server Management Studio, and if you recall, what I mentioned to you is the value table is where we're actually storing the data itself. So do a right click and click on Edit Top 200 Rows. Okay, and here it is. Here are the specific timestamps, and you notice the timestamps themselves. Okay, we'll take a look at when our data log model started, and once it has commenced, it should continue every 10 seconds, and you'll see that from the timestamp. Okay, and if I scroll across, we'll go to the value itself, and you'll notice the values here, okay, of the tags that we're monitoring. So process variable 1, 2, 3, 4. Every 10 seconds they're being updated and logged in our value table. Now, let's say we have enough data on hand and I want to go ahead and stop logging. So we'll simply say stop logging, click on the stop button that we created. You notice it says simply data log off command is given. Okay, so the model itself is stopped. And if we go back to Management Studio, SQL Server Management Studio, and now that I'm back there, what I need to do is refresh the list of data that's been logged. So in order to do that, I want you to do a right click on the screen and say execute SQL. Okay, there we go. And if I scroll all the way to the bottom, you notice the last time that we logged data here was 9:43 and 59 seconds. So if I keep saying execute SQL, as you might expect, it shouldn't log any more data because we told it to stop. Okay, so what we've just done here is successfully set up a database. We've been able to start logging data to that configured database, okay, set by creating a data source, which ultimately is a driver between the FTalk view interface down into the SQL Server Management Studio software. And of course we can start and stop logging that data at any point in time. And finally we were able to monitor that the actual data was being pushed successfully into the database. Okay, so the next step in the process is going to be contained in another video, and you can head back to the lab to check out what's next.